Hi, it's Andy again, and another video. And today I'm going to be talking about the third of the five great C's. And again, so far they're in order, bounce out of order the next two, I guess. But today is the Great Commandment. So, for those of you who are familiar with the L's, the four L's, and I have a ministry called Four L's, which all of this relates to as well. But if you're familiar with our four L's that our church uses, adapted from what I use in our ministry, we have the first L is learn, the second L is live, the third one is love, the fourth one is lead, and then the fifth one, which is the unspoken L, but it's true of all of us as well, is that we will all leave someday, whether that's by death or whatever. So as we think about these five great C's, though, they all apply to that. Strange, right? I mean, if you know me, you know that I would work towards that. So the great calling is the first L of learn. And we learn as a part of our calling. Remember, Jesus said, follow me. So we have to make a decision to do that. And I will make you. There's a learning aspect in that. The second of the C's, which I covered yesterday, is the great confession. And that is the live, that as we determine to confess that God is right, that we are wrong, not only about our sin, but also about how we should live, about who we are, and therefore how we should function. That's really about how we live, right? So the second of the great C's, the great confession, really corresponds with the second of the steps, which is live. Well, today it's an easy connection, right? Because the third L is love, and the great commandment is to love. This commandment is covered very well in both Matthew and in Mark, for instance. In Matthew, it says it a little bit differently. First off, there's a different audience. And so one of the things that we must understand is that there's a possibility, even though the date that it happens, this is unlikely, but there's a possibility that this teaching happened in a couple of different places, a couple of different times with a couple of different people. And that is certainly possible. But the argument of the day was which was the greatest commandment? And different religious leaders would go up to rabbis and they would ask this question somewhat commonly. So, what do you think the greatest commandment is? What do you think the greatest commandment is? And again, this was a somewhat common argument. And so, Jesus, being a rabbi, a rabbi that self-proclaimed, and they were certainly testing him on this. This question happened on Tuesday, which was the day of testing. And if we go back to the Old Testament, that was very significant because it was on Tuesday that the lamb was tested for purity. Did it have any spots? Did it have any blemishes? And if it didn't, then it would be ready for the sacrifice, to be the sacrificial lamb as they prepared for Passover. And so the questions that Jesus receives on that day about should we pay taxes or not, what happens to the person who is married on earth and dies, and what happens to marriage in heaven, and then this question about the what is the greatest commandment, and I guess an earlier question about the authority that Jesus had as it compared, as Jesus then brought about the comparison of John the Baptist. All of this is an aspect of Jesus being tested. Was he the spotless lamb? Was he the perfect lamb? And so, but again, it was that was couched in the bigger discussion that was just very, very common in this time period. What is the greatest commandment? And so, lawyer from Matthew, scribe from Mark, comes to Jesus and asks this question: which is the greatest commandment? And Jesus answered is twofold, folded, combined into one. First, he says, love the Lord your God, and depending upon uh, which gospel that you're looking at, it says heart, soul, mind, and strength, or it says a heart, soul, and mind, I think is what the other one was. And but the idea is that we are to love God fully, and we are to love God completely. Now, I preached on this the other day as a part of getting back to the basics, and I talked about the calling and the commandment and the commission, and the commission is tomorrow. But in my videos tomorrow here. But when we think of Jesus saying to love the Lord your God basically with all of our being, well, that's hard. I mean, I don't do that all the time. I have my own desires. I have my own wants. I have my own needs. At least I think they're my needs. And so I tend to move away from that, right? I mean, I tend to say, well, what about me? And so loving God with everything that I am, wow, that's hard enough. But Jesus adds to that. Now, the love of the Lord your God statement comes from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 5, really, which is called the Shema, which that word in the Hebrew means to hear. And so if you see the beginning of Jesus' quote, say in Mark chapter 12, verse 30, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And so that's why we say God is one. And yet in the New Testament, it's very clear that God is three. And so we have the Trinity, the Trinitarian God, three persons in one being. But that's for a different story for a different day. But Jesus says to love, and again, that's from Deuteronomy 6. But then he brings Leviticus 19:18 into the picture. And he says, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, again, this whole idea, this third great C's is the great commandment of love, but that love is both about God and about us. And I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating. Um, John says in First John, in the letter called First John, in chapter 4, there's a lot of linkage between our ability and our saying that we love God being linked to our ability and our willingness to love others. In fact, John says, I think it's about verse 19, how can we say that we love God whom we cannot see if we don't love our brother or sister, as the case would be, whom we can see? And so Jesus ties these two commandments very much together. He completely links them. In fact, in Matthew, he says that the fulfillment of these two commands is the basis of all of the law, which would be Genesis through Deuteronomy, and all of the prophets, which is essentially the rest of the New Testament, but all of Old Testament, I'm sorry, but all of the teachings that would be a part of that. So the fact that the people did not love God is why the prophets had to come and to try to stir them back towards a loving relationship with God, etc. I really like the way Mark says it, though. Mark records this. In Matthew, it's chapter 22, verses 37 through 40, this little story. In Mark, the part I'm talking about is 30 and 31. I think it starts about verse 28. But Mark says, there is no greater commandment than these. And again, many of you have heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. Jesus has just said, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says, there is no greater commandment, singular, than these, plural. So Jesus takes the two commandments, the plurality of these two commands, and combines them and links them together as one whole singular commandment. And we can't miss that. So again, as John would later write when he wrote his letter, how can we say that we love God if we don't love our brother and sister? And so, as I mentioned in my sermon the other day, Jesus is now meddling. I mean, it's hard enough to say that we love God with all that we are, but to love our neighbor, I mean, maybe you love your neighbor, maybe I love my neighbor, but maybe there's a different neighbor. Maybe there's a few neighbors we like or love, but remember, Jesus didn't say like, he said love. Maybe there's others that we don't. But then Jesus tells a story because he's challenged on this at one part about who's your neighbor, right? And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And so the challenge for us is to take that idea and love others in order that we are serving God, in order that we are loving God as a part of that. If we indeed love God, then we will love others. If we indeed love others, then we can love God. So how do we respond to that? Well, love is a verb. Love is an action. And really, we lose sight of that. And of course, many of you will be aware that there's four different verbs or four different words for love in the New Testament. But any type of love should be action oriented. So there's a couple of things that we're doing this week, and I misspoke in one of the timings of one of the things that we're doing this particular week. I think I said Sunday morning and Sunday evening we would be doing the prayer walk. That is not true. We are hopefully still meeting as a church on Sunday morning, as we did this last week, meeting in the church facility. But Saturday morning at 9 a.m. through approximately 11 a.m., we will meet at the church. A little bit prior to that, we will have a prayer walk going around Fairfax. And so that is a way that we can love people is by praying for them. And this isn't necessarily to engage in conversations. If somebody's outside, we're not going to be rude, but we will keep our distance as teams that go out. We will keep our distance from others. We will certainly respect social distancing, but it is an opportunity for us to show love and to pray for other people for the challenges related to COVID-19. We're going to pass many, many houses that we may not even know who lives there anymore. That's its own problem. How can we love our neighbor if we don't know our neighbor? So that's another lesson for another time as well. But we can still provide a prayer for them. We can still help them on that. And then Sunday evening, in place of our normal Sunday night Bible study, we're going to begin at 5 o'clock. Leaving from the church again, so 5 to about 7 o'clock, and again, it'll be dependent upon how many people come, how many teams we have, as to how much ground we can cover. But the goal is to cover Fairfax within a couple hours on Saturday morning, 9 to 11, and Sunday evening from 5 to 7. The other thing I can't quite announce, I was hoping to be able to announce it today, but I have not received a call back. But we are looking at a mission activity here within the town that might happen within the next week or two. There's going to be a lot of coordination that goes along with that, but that will have to wait as another opportunity for us to love our neighbor in the midst of this COVID-19. So again, I'm waiting for a phone call back from the person I'm going to have, ultimately the person I'm going to have to coordinate this with from another organization. And once I receive that, I will let you all know. So again, 5 great C's. So far, we have covered the great calling, which corresponds to our step of learn. We have covered the great confession yesterday, which corresponds to us living, and today the great commandment, which corresponds to love. And if we can tie all 3 of these together so far, the learn, live, and love, because again, if we are truly loving, then we need to know enough about ourselves. We need to care about enough of ourselves. Remember what Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Really, that doesn't exonerate us from loving if we don't love ourselves. But we tend to love ourselves. We tend to want to take care of ourselves. We tend to take pride in ourselves. And that's sometimes the reason we don't love God, is because we love ourselves more than we love God. And we're able to live properly so that we can love properly once we have learned properly. So again, connecting these 3 so far. And tomorrow we'll talk about the 4th C, which is the Great Commission. And that relates to our need to lead. So until then, let me back up. We do have our Bible study tonight. We'll look at John chapter 3, a little bit of John chapter 3 as a part of that Bible study, and then encourage any questions that you might have for the last part of that. So again, if these videos are helpful, hit the like button, leave a comment. If you have any suggestions for videos going forward, please let me know, and I will try to address those issues as well. So until tonight, if you're able to join us on YouTube Live at 6:30 p.m., great. Otherwise, I'll leave another video for you tomorrow. Thanks.